I meet regularly with someone who is in charge of communications for each of our different environments. So our preschool environment, our middle school environment, our production environment, there's a representative from every environment. It's about 10 people, and we meet regularly, and they come in with, hey, here's what we are communicating in our individual department and what we're focused on. So I get to hear from all of them about their communication priorities and what they're focused on right then. But then I come into it with the broader sense of, hey, as a whole church, how does this line up? I want to make sure we're not going to be like bombarding people in our church with communication, all at the same time about different messages and things like that. So I kind of come in with that broader perspective of what we're doing as a whole church.
Welcome to today's episode of the Missional Marketing Podcast. My name is Bart Blair. I'm a coach at Missional Marketing, and I'm joined by the CEO and another coach at Missional Marketing, Jason Hamrock. We are your hosts of the Missional Marketing Podcast. And if you're new to the show, thanks for tuning in. If you're not new to the show, well, thanks for coming back. We really appreciate you tuning in. Our goal is to help your church grow by leveraging digital marketing and effective communications. And so today, we're actually going to be talking specifically about church communications. Jason, why don't you introduce today's guest?
I'd love to. Yeah, this is always near and dear to my heart because I'm a former communication director. And I think if you're a full-time staff communication director, part-time staff, volunteer, whatever role you're in, we can always learn from one another. And so today we have Sarah Robison. Robson, it's not the R. There's no N on there. There's Sarah Robson.
Robison.
We're having a good time with that one because we talked about it today. But Sarah is the communication director at Gwinnett Church. That's a big church outside of Atlanta. They're part of North Point Ministries. So Andy Stanley's thing. Sarah gets to be the communication director, and she's actually pioneering that department. She's been with the church for a little while, but they never really had a communication director. She stepped in that role, and I really appreciate the approach that she's taken to connect with all the ministries and implement a communications system, a communications department at Gwinnett Church. And so we kind of unpack that today. We dive in, and you're going to learn a lot from Sarah.
I was, totally surprised to hear as we got into the conversation that she's kind of pioneering this communications department. Yeah. Some of our listeners might actually be familiar with Gwinnett because Gwinnett was that church that kind of pioneered that For Gwinnett movement, and that really churches all around the country started doing that. We're for our city. My church has bumper stickers that says For McKinney, and you might have For Boston or what have you. And this is going back, 6 or 8 years ago. The church is only about 10 years old, I think. But they did all that, organically years and years ago. Now they actually are developing an intentional communication strategy with a very talented communications director. And we think that what Sarah shares with us in this podcast is going to be really helpful for those of you who are listening, especially those of you who are just trying to figure out how to build a communications team, build a department, learn how to sit in the role of being a communications director and work with all the various staff that you might have in your church. So we are hopeful, confident that you're going to learn something new today from this conversation. We hope that you're learning new things every time you tune into the podcast. And if you do appreciate what we do, if this is valuable to you, it would be really valuable to us if you would leave us a rating and a review. It helps more people find the podcast on the different platforms where people listen and watch podcasts. And if you haven't subscribed, make sure that you do that. That way you don't miss any of the other awesome upcoming episodes that we have planned for you. I'm Bart. This is Jason. Again, we appreciate you tuning in to the show today. And without any further delay, here's our interview with Sarah Robison from Gwinnett Church. Hey, Sarah Robison, thanks so much for joining Jason and me on the show today. We're glad to have you as our guest.
Thanks so much. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Hey, so what we love to do when we start out this podcast is just have our guests share a little bit about their story, their background. So we don't really know you very well. In fact, we were just kind of getting acquainted before we started recording. And I said, wait, we're not going to learn all about Sarah until we start recording so we can get all the good stuff. So why don't you share a little bit about your background, how you got into ministry, what kind of work you've done maybe before ministry or during ministry, and how you ended up at Gwinnett. And then we'll talk a little bit about the church itself.
Sure. Well, I have been at Gwinnett Church since 2018, but before that, I was working at a church in Pittsburgh for several years. in a similar communications role. I'm from Pittsburgh. So Atlanta, where I am now, is the only other place I've lived besides Pittsburgh, but still a big Steelers fan. Didn't work out for me last year, but I'm hanging in there. But I worked, like I said, in a similar role at a different church in Pittsburgh, in communications for about 5 years before I moved down here. Ministry was not what I thought I was going to be doing for my career. I went to college for advertising and marketing, and I've always loved that. I love the messaging and the psychology of it and that sort of thing. And I ended up actually working at a church while I was in college to help me kind of get through paying for that. And while I was there, I just kind of learned, wow, I really care about what we're doing. I care about the work of ministry, and just have been really fortunate to find how my abilities and just my interest in messaging and in marketing and that sort of thing can be applied to the church world. And so I'm very grateful that I've had several opportunities to work in communications within the context of ministry, because there are two things that I love that just got to be combined. So, but like I said, I've been at Gwinnett since 2018 now. And I came here for a different job that was not communications at all, but wanted to be part of Gwinnett Church. And so when there was an opportunity, I moved down here and started that. And then about a year and a half in, I started to take on some responsibilities in the context of communications here. And then it just grew into my full-time role. So that's what I'm doing now.
Did they not have a communications director before you?
They did not. I'm the first one.
Wow. So you got to pioneer the position.
I'm still pioneering, in fact.
Yeah,
you're still pioneering.
Yes.
Great. Well,
we're
gonna unravel that a little bit here in just a minute. I have a question though. So when you went into school and you're studying marketing and that was the direction that you were headed, what did you think you were going to end up doing? Like, what was, before you realized that ministry was your call, what was your dream?
Mm-hmm. I kind of thought I would just end up probably at like a marketing agency, something like that. I really love writing. I've always loved writing. So I thought I'll probably end up something in copywriting or, something like that for an agency. But I just didn't think it was going to be at a church, and then found out, I care about this. So thankfully I kind of get to do that at a church.
Wow.
Okay. Wow. All right. That's awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about Gwinnett. And you said you moved there to do something different than what you're doing now. There are probably a lot of people listening to our podcast that are maybe familiar with Gwinnett. It's a church with a great reputation and has been known for some things. You obviously wanted to go there. You wanted to relocate from Pittsburgh to Atlanta, which that's a very interesting move. What was it about the church that attracted you there? And then just kind of give our audience a bit of an overview of what the church is all about.
Yeah. So Gwinnett Church is just outside of Atlanta. This church has been here for about, just a little over 10 years now, but we are connected to North Point Community Church. So Andy Stanley's our founding pastor. And we're part of a whole network of churches now around the Atlanta area. But I actually worked for, the church I worked for in Pittsburgh it's called a network church. And so it's very similar. It's the same structure, the same model, same way of doing church as what we're doing at Gwinnett and North Point and that sort of thing. So basically it's just these network churches basically say, hey, we want to do church the same way. And so they get to implement a lot of the same structures where they are. So I was part of a church like that in Pittsburgh. And through that connection that we had to North Point and these churches in Atlanta, I used to just come down here every now and then just to learn from what North Point and Gwinnett were doing and some other churches. I would come spend a Sunday morning here and just observe and hang out with people just to see, hey, what does this look like here? So I could learn some things and take it back to our church in Pittsburgh. And interestingly enough, my very first time at Gwinnett Church, which was about 8 years ago now, I came just to learn and observe. And when I left that day, I thought, I think I want to be part of this. There's just something really special about this place. And I didn't come down here with that objective in mind at all. I just came to observe, like I said. But there really is something special about Gwinnett. People say that a lot. And I think it really is because it feels like a family here. It feels like family being on staff, but it feels like family, I think, once you just step on the campus. There's just something very familiar about it, very approachable. And I love that. That just drew me here. So it took a few years, but I got here eventually and have been really happy to be part of this place since then.
Wow. So you took over the role of communications, I think you said like about a year and a half ago. Was that?
It was about a year and a half into my role. So about 2.5 years now. Yeah.
Okay. So, wow. So you're pioneering this thing called communications, and no doubt they were doing something similar to that, but you started to put some organization to it, I'm sure. Then COVID happened. So, which there's no blueprint for how you do church with a pandemic. And did you guys, what was the strategy? How that, just walk us through on what you guys did and how you've gotten back to where you are today.
It was definitely an interesting time to be sort of transitioning into this role full time during a pandemic. It was about 2 months in, I think. And like I said, I had been taking on some responsibilities within the realm of communications here, but it wasn't my full time role. And then COVID happened. And then it was like, well, we got to communicate a lot of things and we got to communicate them differently now. So we got to figure this out. And that sort of expedited, I think, my transition into this full time role. And like you said, nobody knew what they were doing because we've never been through a pandemic before. So it was, I think the biggest shift, and for a lot of people, I'm sure, is that, everything's got to be online now. So many things, and the ways that we would communicate with people from a stage on a Sunday morning, we can't do that the same way anymore. Everything's got to be online. And really just trying to keep people feeling connected to their church when they can't physically be here. That was very challenging. And we tried a lot of things and we moved quickly because we had to. And certainly not all of them worked, but we had a lot of things that we tried on social media and just email campaigns and things like that to try and help people stay connected. We learned the value of things like Facebook Live really quickly, just, anything we could really just to try and get people to feel like, hey, I'm still connected to my church, even though I can't physically be there. But we've learned some things from that time that we've continued, and a lot of things that we have not continued because they didn't go as planned, and that's okay. Yeah. But, we just experimented. And I think the thing that I love about this is a part of Gwinnett Church's DNA anyway, is that we're willing to try things and fail, and that's okay. So that was my own tendency sometimes, is to want to perfect something before I'll launch it. And so working at Gwinnett has helped me figure out how to move a little faster into things and don't wait for it to be perfect, but just try it anyway. And COVID definitely pushed us all into that kind of thinking, which is healthy. I think it was good.
Yeah, I think it's a healthy strategy. You kind of figure out, okay, this is what we're about. This is where we want to do. And this is our strategy, but don't get hung up on that, right? If it fails, then we pivot. We go that direction now, right?
Yeah.
Give me some examples like where you have actually done that, where things have changed and you've tried things, they've failed, but now you've tried some other stuff and that's sticking and that's growing. And so that's what's a couple strategies. And the second question is that aligned with leadership? Is leadership the one that's kind of directing that strategy?
Well, it's interesting for the second part of what you're saying. It's interesting to be part of a whole network of churches because there is an overall structure for what all of North Point Ministries is doing. And then there's some autonomy too between our different campuses because we're in different communities. I mean, even just our churches across the Atlanta area. We have a church about 40 minutes away from here that is in just a very different kind of community than we are in Gwinnett. And so they have different needs and they have a different voice in their communication, as they should and as we should. Yeah. So it's nice that we have, I'm grateful to work for an organization where we do have some autonomy. But then, of course, we have full agreement on our overall strategy that we want to inspire people to follow Jesus. And so that's the most important thing. And it's going to look probably different for the way we work toward that goal among our different communities, but that is our goal. So I'm grateful that we can experiment a little bit, and we definitely had to do that in the middle of COVID. So some of the things that we tried, especially right at the beginning, like I said, we definitely used Facebook Live a lot. We actually had, we had a service planned. I think it might have been like a night of worship, something not typical to our Sunday mornings, but we had something like that planned originally. And then we went, okay, we got to do this online now. And so the fastest thing we could do was let's put this on Facebook Live. And we just had a few of us staff members in the chat during that. And I mean, it was amazing to see our whole church community come together, chatting with each other throughout the service. And just to think, this is a totally different way of doing this, but they feel really connected. So we've learned some things from that sort of thing that we've done. Now it's not a Facebook Live thing, but our full service is on YouTube every Sunday, and we have someone in the chat there. We have, now we record specific online hosting, or we have a host introduce the service speaking specifically to our online audience, because that's still about half of our church is online. So we've been able to learn some things about how do we make that online experience help people still feel very connected wherever they are, but this is still their church. So we've learned a lot in that regard.
Do you think if you had to split up your time, is it as a communication director? I mean, you can wear a lot of hats. You do wear a lot of hats, I'm sure.
Yeah.
How much of your time is spent internally focused versus maybe online or externally focused? Or is there another area that you like, weekend worship, or what's that look like for you in your weekly balance?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that, like I said, this role has not existed before. And so one of the things that I'm still trying to figure out. But a big part of my role has been to lead it's a communications team, but it's really, I meet regularly with someone who is in charge of communications for each of our different environments. So our preschool environment, our middle school environment, our production environment, there's a representative from every environment. It's about 10 people, and we meet regularly, and they come in with, hey, here's what we are communicating in our individual department and what we're focused on. So I get to hear from all of them about their communication priorities and what they're focused on right then. But then I come into it with the broader sense of, hey, as a whole church, how does this line up? I want to make sure we're not going to be like bombarding people in our church with communication, all at the same time about different messages and things like that. So I kind of come in with that broader perspective of what we're doing as a whole church. So that puts me in a lot of different seats in communicating with each of our environments. But I love that part of my job where I get to kind of pull together and say, hey, where can we maybe put some more strategy to this? Or, your team's talking about this thing and your team's talking about that thing. We could probably double up on that because it's kind of the same audience. So let's be strategic about that. So that's a lot of my role. That takes up the majority of my week. And then I also work very closely with our lead pastor. He's my direct boss. And so I communicate with him frequently about just what we're communicating so that he's aware. But also I want to know from him what is important to him as far as, what does he want our church to know? And more than that, what's the voice he wants to use? So a lot of my time is spent just getting to know how would he say this and how would he want us to communicate this? Yeah. So that's most of what my week looks like.
I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in to the Missional Marketing Podcast. It's always our goal to help you as a church leader leverage your communications and digital media resources to reach more people for Jesus. One of the ways that we help churches do that is through creating social media content from your Sunday sermon videos. Specifically, what we can do for you is to create short sermon snippets from 30 seconds long to 5 minutes long, capturing those mic drop moments that you really want people to remember. We edit the videos, add captions, add your church branding, and then you or we post them to your social media channels. As a pastor, I always love to see my sermon content live on beyond the Sundays, and I know that's what you value for your sermons too. We offer this service as a monthly subscription, but we've got a 6-week trial that gives you a chance to see how it works. If you'd like more information, just shoot me an email at bblair@missionalmarketing.com. I'd be glad to meet with you, explain the process, and answer any questions that you have. Once again, thanks for tuning into our podcast. Let's get back to the interview.
Well, I love what you just said with the group of 10 people. And so for our audience, that something just popped in my head. It doesn't matter if you're working with 10 people, 30 people, or 4 people. Mm-hmm. You're the director of communications, but you meet with each department as their communications person, mm-hmm. right? And so, so it's not like you're meeting with the student pastor and he's just talking to you. No, he's the communications guy for that department that comes to you. You're the director of the whole thing. I really like that actually position and strategy, because collectively you're all on the same team, right? Moving forward, because your lead pastor's going, this is the vision. This is the strategy. This is where we're headed. It makes your job a little bit easier. it's still,
no, it definitely does. Yeah.
Hey, Sarah, so wearing a lot of different hats, and Jason talked about, things that might make your job easier. Are there any like technical tools that you're using with your team, like Asana, project management tools, just Google Sheets and Google Docs? What kind of things are you using that you're implementing with the rest of the staff on your team to simplify or to streamline what you're doing to make sure that you're executing on the things that you need to be executing on?
The tools we use are really pretty simple. I am using Google Sheets a lot. I have all of my social media planning is done in Google Sheets, and I have a team of people who help me with that. So that's just easy and accessible for all of us to use. And then really, this is going to sound obvious, but we use Slack a lot. The different channels there I use that a lot as far as, I'll update our staff on, for example, Easter's coming up this weekend. So I'll update our staff on, hey, here's how we're promoting Easter. Here are some social media assets you can have if you want to post on your own channels, some things like that. So I just use Slack for all of that. And then the different groups I want to communicate with among our staff. And then just Dropbox. So, they're pretty simple, but those are the three things I use the most.
Wow.
Well, I wish it was obvious that everyone should be using Slack. Jason, is it obvious that everyone should be using Slack?
It's not obvious. Yeah.
Jason's a Slack champion. Yes, Jason is he's a Slack champion.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a really good tool.
Yeah.
So as you look at the landscape of churches, you're in your second church, but really to some degree, it's kind of like being in the same church, because at least from a mission, vision, values standpoint, a lot of the things are very similar. So you've served for a couple of different leaders now. What are the things that you're doing to make sure that you're growing, that you're continuing to kind of stay on the forefront of how to be effective, how to use the tools that are available aside from Slack? Who are you listening to and who are you learning from?
Well, I am very grateful to be part of a whole community of churches here. And so we don't have necessarily like a person doing my exact role in each of our Atlanta area campuses. The responsibilities are there, but in some campuses, it's 3 or 4 people who are kind of, one person owns this piece, one person owns that piece. Some campuses, it is one person, it looks different. But there are people who manage communication in different ways at all of our Atlanta area campuses. And so I try to be intentional about connecting with them and meeting with them. And that's been a huge support, just to be part of a network like that, because we get to ask each other questions and we get to meet regularly and say, hey, how are you going to promote this thing? Or how are you going to share that information? And then, of course, a lot of times it's like, oh, I didn't think about that. So we kind of get to share perspective on those things, which has been really, really helpful. But even before I was part of North Point Ministries and Gwinnett Church, when I was working in Pittsburgh, I tried to be intentional about doing that anyway. And I didn't have a built-in network, but I tried to just make one. And a lot of it came from just being intentional about connecting with people who were at these Atlanta area churches even before I moved here and worked here. But a lot of times just those conversations bring up whole new ideas and perspectives that I just wouldn't have otherwise. This role, I think, I'm very focused on communications, and I'm really the one at our campus whose job is communications, which is great. But if I'm not intentional about reaching out to other people, then our messaging can very quickly just become Sarah's voice and the way Sarah thinks and that sort of thing. So I have to have that other input and perspective just to try and keep up. So that's a big part of it.
Wow.
Well, let me ask you another question, kind of on the same line of thinking, but maybe a little different. You are kind of pioneering, Jason used the word pioneering this church communications, this department, this team, however it looks like for you. A lot of people that we have the opportunity to work with are people who are stepping into a communications role or trying to invent one, trying to make one. as you're going through this process of taking a church that's, it's a sizable church, there's a lot of activity, a lot of ministry going on, and now all of a sudden you're stepping into this role. What have been some of the things that you've done to prioritize kind of creating the role and perhaps building the team? And how would you coach someone who came to you and said, okay, I've been hired on the church staff to be a graphic designer for the last, 3 years. Now, all of a sudden, I'm going to be a communications director. What do I do? We've never had anybody in this role before. We've never had a team. What are the things that I need to do to build this department?
I think probably the biggest thing, and this looks different everywhere, but probably the biggest thing for me was just getting to know, like I said, the voice of our lead pastor and what is important to him. Because if I start moving in a direction that is not important to him, or that he just is not part of his vision for this church, then that is some time and effort wasted. So a lot of it is just me trying to get to know what is important to him and how would he communicate. The thing that was different for me in that was we actually we got a new lead pastor about a year and a half ago. So I haven't really worked with him for that long, but thankfully he's very easy to follow. He's a fantastic leader. So that's been an easy transition, but that investment in just getting to know him and how he communicates and what's important there, that I think is the biggest foundational thing that you could do, just to make the most of all your efforts going forward. And there's a lot of trust there, and he lets me, share ideas and try new things and all that stuff. But like I said, it's been very helpful to know his voice and what's important to him in terms of our vision, and then go from there. So I think that's a big part of it. And then similarly, when I took on this role, I met with, before we even had that communications team that I talked about of about 10 people, before that was actually an official thing, I just met with each of our environment directors, just to say, tell me more about what's going on here and what you're working on and what's important, for your team right now. I really want my role I want the people who work here in our other departments to see my role as a support to them. So it's kind of centrally located, like I said, in that I've got the broader perspective of what we're communicating, but I want for all of our teams to think of what I do in my role as a support to them. So they're in the details of, all kinds of stuff as they're trying to, plan an event for high schoolers. They're thinking about registration and food that's got to be there and leaders and volunteers and all that stuff. So it can be a very different mindset for them, to shift gears and now think about, okay, how do we promote this and what's the messaging around it and that sort of thing. And so they're doing such a great job at what they're doing. I want them to view my role as hey, she can come in and help us think through how do we communicate this thing to parents and actually get people here. So I think just trying to invest in each of our teams and those relationships first, I think it's paid off, and that we have a good rapport now, and that we can, I can communicate easily with our different directors and departments, and really try and just come alongside them and support the great work that they're already doing.
Well, Jason, Jason, can I ask you a question? I'm going to ask you a question, because you're communications director. Okay. So you have something to contribute to this conversation. And Sarah, you may want to answer the same question. So Sarah sort of postured things just now, basically saying, hey, look, we've got, the youth ministry, the student ministry staff, they're putting on this event, they're doing this thing, and that's the lane that they're running in, and they're really good at it. And then I'm going to come alongside and I'm going to support them and be the one that communicates it. Jason, have you ever had situations when you were leading a communications team and you were in church where that person or that team that's planning that event or that activity doesn't really want to lean on you to be the one that communicates it? They get kind of their own wild hair, their own idea about how they're going to do it. They're going to create their own media plan and their own social media strategy and just kind of run cowboy. Have you ever had situations like that?
Students.
So how do you deal with that when it's so Sarah's basically, she's nice. She's really nice. And so she's like, hey, I'm here to support you. I want to help you. What do you do when they don't see Sarah, you as a nice guy?
First of all, Sarah is an effective communications director because she's an effective communicator. But she said to go and meet with all the those ministries and learn what they are all about. Brilliant. So if you've not done that, communication directors, Start there. But I also, and I learned this actually from Maddie, who's another communication director on our team, that to me, so often it was the other way around, Bart. It was the ministries would look at me and say, how are you, Jason, going to make our event super successful? We want tons of people. And I'm like, yeah, but your event's really for like 20 people. I'm like, so I said, so you want me to take a funnel and reach the masses all to get like 20 people or 50 people at your event. So I'm supposed to reach 10,000 people to get 50. We're not going to do that. And this was Maddie's idea. She goes, that funnel, we're going to turn it upside down. We're going to reach 50 people or 20 people to get 100 people or 200 people. And that's how you're going to grow your ministry, is you've got to take the people that love and are passionate about what you do and build it from there. We will give you the tools and the resources to help you do that. But unless it's all church, unless our lead pastor is going, we're pushing this, then that's the strategy. That's at least what I used to do and what I always recommend. Sarah, do you kind of take the same approach, or what's that look like?
Yeah, very similar. I think one of the things I'm very passionate about within the world of communications is a more targeted approach to things. So I think a lot of churches, and it's easy to do this, but I think a lot of churches look at, we have to communicate this event for this specific group of people or something like that, and think, well, then we should just say it to everybody. We should send an email to our whole church. We should say it from stage where everybody is. And I'm like, but only about 10% of the people in the room actually need to be there, or, it's not for everyone else. So let's be careful about where we're sending these messages and where we're promoting certain things. But then on the other side of that too, I think we can be much more effective in our communication when we choose the right audience. Our world is very noisy, and we all have a lot of information coming at us all day, every day, in a bunch of different ways. And so I think we're not doing a great job if we don't kind of filter through those things and say, well, how's this going to be valuable to you, and start with that. And so if we're communicating something that, is not really for everyone, but we're trying to communicate it to everyone, we'll lose probably 90% of the people along the way, because they think, well, that's not for me. And so they tune out, and then we've lost them for the next thing we want to say.
That's right.
So I really try to, I'm involved in our stage communication also, as far as working with our production team, and on a Sunday morning, what's said from stage. And so a lot of times, if we get, a department saying, hey, we would like for this thing to be communicated from stage, or, an email that goes to everybody. If I think, hey, I don't think that that's really for everyone. I try to be careful about, again, being supportive to them, but saying not just, no, we're not going to do that, but hey, I don't think that's the right space for that. So let's think through a different approach. We can, we have great capabilities with technology now to figure out, we have this huge email list where we can find out all sorts of things about how people are interacting with our content to know who's actually going to be interested in this thing. Yeah. And then let's target them, because it really is going to be valuable to them. It's a great thing that we're doing. But let's just make sure it's to the right audience at the appropriate time in the right way.
Yeah. That's the song I sing. The right message to the right audience on the right platform in the right timing. Those four things. You have to discern those things. Hey, a quick question. What church management software do you guys use for your communication, for like emailing and stuff?
That's all through MailChimp. And we actually
so you do all of your emailing through MailChimp. Okay.
Yeah, it's all through MailChimp. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. That's simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like
we can track a lot of helpful information.
Slack. Yeah, you really do keep it simple. Okay.
Yeah, I don't really have a lot of brand new things to say there. I'm just using what works.
That's great.
That's key. Yeah.
We need to land the plane on this thing. But before we do, I just wanted to make sure that is there anything that you wish that we had asked you, or you'd like to share that you think might be pertinent for our audience that we didn't kind of hit on today? We kind of went in a bunch of different directions with the conversation, but I want to make sure that if there's anything that was kind of burning that you wanted to share, that I gave you the opportunity to do that.
I think the only thing is this is just something that I care a lot about in the world of communications. And I talked about it just a little bit in our last bit of conversation, but I think it's just so important to think through in all of our communication, think through the lens of why does this matter to somebody? What's the benefit? What's the value here? And start with that. That's been a huge focus of mine since I started in this role. I think it's very easy in church world and outside of church world, but certainly within this context, to want to present things to people as, hey, we're doing this thing and you should come because we're doing it. So that's, we just make an announcement about something like, hey, you should just be part of this thing and here are the details. But I think we've got to be really diligent in this role and in this world about thinking through benefit first, lead with value, because what we're doing is really important and we really believe it will make someone's life better. So I think the role of, these, and anyone in communications director or, volunteer, anyone sitting in this kind of a seat, I think it's worth the work to figure out why does this matter to people, start with that, craft a really good message because it matters and it can really get people to lean in.
Oh, love it.
That's awesome. Sarah, if anybody that's listening or watching the podcast today is just kind of curious about anything that you've shared and they'd like to drill down on any of this stuff, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Probably by email or social media. So I can be found on the Gwinnett Church website, gwinnettchurch.org. There's a staff page there. And so people can email me directly from there or send me a DM on Instagram, Sarah with an H-K Robison, R-O-B-I-S-O-N.
With no N, yes.
No
Robison,
middle N.
No
Sarah,
N. Sarah
K.
Robison. All right, yes. We got it. Hey, Sarah, we really appreciate you. Here we are, Easter week. What people that are watching this or listening to this don't realize is that today is the day before Good Friday. And so you've taken some time out of your very busy, I'm sure, Easter schedule to hang out with us and to bless our audience. We appreciate that. So thanks so much.
Thank you guys so much. This has been great. Thanks for letting me be part of the conversation.